Justice isn't always served quietly. In some cases, it's jaw-dropping, heart-pounding, and downright shocking. In craziest sentences of all time, you'll witness moments that redefine the boundaries of crime and punishment. Brace yourself for courtroom drama like you've never seen before. Let's get started. In 2013, in the quiet suburban community of Aurora, Colorado, 18-year-old Isabella Guzman, a seemingly ordinary teenager, murdered her mother, Yeonmi Hoi, in a horrific act of violence that left even seasoned investigators stunned. Yeonmi Hoi, a 47-year-old mother, was stabbed more than 70 times in an attack so frenzied it left 79 wounds across her neck, face, and torso. The crime wasn't just tragic, it was deeply unsettling.
And that her mom was concerned enough that she called police on August 28th. They came to the house and told Isabella that her mom could kick her out for her behavior. It seemed to calm her down.
The night of the murder began with simmering tension in the family home. According to accounts, Yeonmi and Isabella had been arguing for weeks, their relationship strained to the breaking point. That evening, Isabella's stepfather was home when he heard the commotion upstairs. When he rushed to investigate, he found a horrifying scene. Isabella standing over Yeonmi's lifeless body, the floor covered in blood. In a state of shock, her stepfather could do little as Isabella fled the house.
Guzman's stepdad heard a thump, ran upstairs, and saw blood oozing out from under the bathroom door. Court documents indicate that he later saw Guzman exit the bathroom with a knife in her hand.
Law enforcement quickly arrived on the scene, but Yeonmi Hoi was beyond saving. Officers and paramedics described the scene as one of the most gruesome they had ever encountered. A manhunt for Isabella began immediately. She was found the next day and taken into custody, charged with her mother's murder. As the details of the case unfolded, the story took an even darker and more complex turn. In the months leading up to the murder, Isabella had been battling severe mental health issues. During her trial, court-appointed doctors revealed that Isabella had been diagnosed with schizophrenia, a condition that had warped her perception of reality for years. At the time of the attack, Isabella believed her mother was not Yeonmi, but a figure from her delusions named Cecilia. In her mind, she was on a mission to kill Cecilia to save the world from some imagined catastrophe. The defense presented a chilling piece of evidence to support Isabella's delusional state. A threatening letter Isabella had sent to her mother before the murder. It read, "You will pay," but was addressed to Cecilia. This bizarre detail painted a picture of a young woman trapped in a dangerous spiral of paranoia and confusion. Her erratic behavior during court hearings only deepened the unease. At times, she appeared detached, staring blankly into the cameras, her expression unnervingly calm for someone accused of such a heinous crime.
The 18-year-old smirked at the camera as she stood up and walked to the defense table this afternoon, her arms and legs shackled. After the judge read the complaint against her, she looked over.
Both prosecutors and the defense agreed on one thing. Isabella was incapable of distinguishing right from wrong at the time of the murder. The court accepted her plea of not guilty by reason of insanity. Instead of prison, Isabella was committed to a state psychiatric hospital, where she would remain until deemed no longer a danger to herself or the public, a period that could span years or even her entire lifetime.
I was abused at home by my family for many years. My parents are Jehovah's Witnesses, and I left the religion when I was 14.
For Isabella, the years that followed became a journey of reckoning and recovery. 7 years after her sentencing, she broke her silence in an interview with CBS News' Rick Salinger. Speaking with a calm demeanor, Isabella expressed her desire to rejoin society. She admitted that she had not been herself the night of the murder and credited medication and therapy with helping her regain her sense of reality.
He asked me if I wanted to go in there and look through to get some clothing, so I did. The other patient left, and he went in there and shut the door behind him.
In the interview, she also shared a more personal side of her story. Isabella claimed her struggles began long before the crime, pointing to years of emotional turmoil and harm within her family. She described feeling increasingly isolated after choosing to step away from the Jehovah's Witness faith as a teenager, a decision that created a rift with her family. According to Isabella, the lack of understanding and support at home only deepened her mental health struggles, leaving her vulnerable to the delusions that would ultimately drive her to violence. As of now, Isabella remains under the care of the state, her future uncertain. Larissa and Christopher Rodriguez's actions did not only lead to the death of their son, but they also covered it up and buried him in the most undignified manner.
6 years in prison. Count 5, abuse of a corpse, felony of 5th degree, 9 months in prison. Counts 1, 2, and 3 to be served consecutive to each other. and concurrent to the sentence imposed in count 5 for a total sentence of 25 years.
This is Larissa and Christopher Rodriguez, and what they did will make you sick. 5-year-old Jordan Rodriguez was last seen alive in September, and his body was found buried in his mother's backyard 2 months later. The culprits? His mother and her boyfriend. Jordan was disabled and born prematurely with only one kidney. Larissa passed on what she experienced as a child to her children. She was neglected and mistreated as a child, and this affected her life as a mother. Christopher was also born into a family where he witnessed violence and crime as a child. The consequences of their upbringing was the death of Jordan, which, to this day, authorities are unable to figure out. All that is known is Larissa and her sister's account of what happened to her son. Larissa claimed that Christopher had brought Jordan into her bedroom when he was barely conscious. Instead of seeking help for her child, she gave Jordan a cold shower and put him in her bed. Jordan died in the next 24 hours. As it turned out, little Jordan had suffered mistreatment and neglect when he was alive, and his body was treated even worse after his death. Larissa's sister told the police that she had seen Jordan tied up with a sock in his mouth before this incident happened. During the investigation, another child was found eating a sandwich full of cockroaches. Christopher and Larissa buried Jordan secretly, and his body wasn't found until December 19, 2017. Christopher's brother had ratted the couple out to the police. After 2 days of digging, Jordan was found in a 4-foot hole with a diaper over his head and wrapped in bags of mothballs.
Ma, I just wanted to let you know that I still love you, but I want you to tell me the truth and what really happened.
This case triggered outrage in the courtroom about the level of depravity that these people subjected their son to. Even the judge was shaken by the callousness. She asked Christopher how he can live with himself after his actions.
I know as a judge I'm not supposed to show emotion. And in 22 years I never have. This is one of the worst things I've ever seen in my life.
They were charged with involuntary manslaughter, felonious assault, child endangering, and gross abuse of a corpse, and the couple both pled guilty to these charges. The judge who passed their sentence had tears in her eyes as she passed judgment, unable to stop herself when confronted with the horror that Jordan faced before he died, and the horrifying way in which his corpse was treated after. Larissa was sentenced to 25 years in prison, and Christopher was sentenced to 28 years. Larissa was seen wiping away a few tears, but Christopher showed no emotion as his sentence was read. You may think Larissa and Christopher's method of burying their child was sick, but what Dee and Eric Millerberg did before they hid the body of their victim will make you shiver.
I just want to say that I am appalled and disgusted by what I've done.
Dee and Eric Millerberg were charged with the murder and desecration of 16-year-old Alexis Rasmussen. In 2011, the body of Alexis was found in a garbage bag in Utah, 38 days after she went missing. Before her death, she was babysitting Dee and Eric's children. The details you are about to hear will rile you up. Dee and Eric were substance users and would often invite the 16-year-old to take substances with them under the guise of babysitting. It was revealed by Dee in the court that Eric used to smoke marijuana with Alexis and have intimate relations with her in their home. She testified that later on, Alexis asked for substances that were stronger. It then became a norm for Eric to invite Alexis over, bribe her with substances and alcohol, and have intimate relations with her along with Dee. On the night of Alexis's death, Dee and Eric had told Alexis to come to babysit their children. When she got there, Dee injected Alexis with high quantities of substances, and she and Eric performed intimate acts on each other. Afterward, Alexis began to react badly to the substances she'd taken and was hysterical. She asked the couple if she could take a bath in their bathroom, and they agreed, but left her alone. Dee stated that she was left alone at her request. After taking a bath, Alexis complained that she was cold, and the couple wrapped her in a blanket and left her in another room. Barely an hour later, they found her in the room they'd left her in. She was not responsive, and according to Dee, who was a nurse, she tried to resuscitate her. Alexis died, and the Millerbergs put her body in a garbage bag before disposing of it. When her body was found, an autopsy showed that there were large quantities of toxic substances in Alexis's system, and this was what led to her death.
I know you have needs, I know you have children, I know you have families, But sometimes, you do such acts that are such extreme.
In hopes of a lesser sentence, Dee testified against her husband, and she added that he was controlling and manipulative. Eric, on the other hand, had boasted to people about his escapades with 16-year-old girls. The couple was sentenced to life in prison for child abuse, homicide, obstruction of justice, and statutory rape, among others.
One day he'll be different than me, and then God will bring peace.
It was reported that Eric also cried and apologized as he was led out of the courtroom. Bad, indulgent, and neglectful parenting led to innocent kids losing their lives in a Michigan school, and couple James and Jennifer Crumbley paid the price for their negligent and bad parenting.
See me move the garbage can?
Is that tape lying on the ground, Christy?
That's tape on the ground, yes.
On November 30th, 2021, a tragic mass shooting occurred at Oxford High School in Michigan, claiming the lives of 4 students and injuring 7 others. The victims were 17-year-old Justin Schilling, 16-year-old Tate Meyer, 17-year-old Madison Baldwin, and 14-year-old Hannah St. Juliana. The shooter was identified as 15-year-old Ethan Crumbley. This will be the beginning of a long case in the history of mass shootings. The parents of Ethan, James, and Jennifer were declared wanted and arrested for involuntary manslaughter in connection to their son's crimes. Ethan Crumbley suffered from mental issues, and his disturbing actions were constantly ignored and even encouraged by his parents. Ethan was obsessed with violence and had previously shown that he had violent tendencies. He admitted to taking the gun to school and hiding it in his backpack before firing at his classmates later, and shooting one of them twice. He was sentenced to life in prison, and different charges were leveled against his parents, all on account of their neglect. Jennifer refused to get professional help for Ethan, even though there were signs that he needed help. She encouraged him to do something that eventually led to the tragic death of these young students. A few days before the shooting, Jennifer had taken Ethan to a local gun range and taught him how to fire a semi-automatic handgun. He used the same gun to kill his schoolmates. Naturally, his parents teaching him to fire a gun and letting him have access to it was punishable by the law. And they were indeed punished. Jennifer and James became the first parents to be held responsible for their son's actions. They were sentenced to 15 years in prison.
I understand my words are not going to bring any comfort.
When James heard the sentence at the final judgment, he broke down and wept. He apologized for his son's actions. Both parents apologized for what happened to the victims of their son's violent behavior. While the couple felt bad about their sentence, they were empathetic enough to have understood the pain of the families whose children and siblings were murdered by their son. For most of these couples, their crimes were majorly criminal negligence. However, James and Jennifer appeared to have shown the most remorse, admitting to themselves and others that their neglectful parenting has resulted in the death of his innocent schoolmates. Up next, the heartbreaking story of Kevin Strickland, a man who spent decades behind bars for a crime he didn't commit.
Today, Missouri Judge James Welsh ordered his immediate release, ending one of the longest wrongful convictions in U.S. history.
I was actually watching a soap opera, and it thing went across the news break or whatever they call them, and I just couldn't believe what I was hearing.
So that's how you learned?
That's how I learned.
What you're about to hear will break your heart. Kevin Strickland was only 22 years old when he was charged with first and second-degree murder by the state of Missouri in 1979. His charges were the result of a truly evil and cold-blooded homicide that took the lives of 3 people. On October 25, 1978, in Missouri, a house was found ransacked with 4 victims in the house. 3 of them had been fatally shot, and only one of them, a woman named Cynthia Douglas, had survived with a gunshot to her leg. She crawled out and told the police what had happened. A group of assailants had attacked before tying them up and shooting until they thought they were all dead. The day following the killings, Strickland was taken into custody and charged with the victims' murders. Following Strickland, the suspects, Kilm Atkins and Vincent Bell, were taken into custody. Strickland was arrested after they found a fingerprint of Strickland's on Bell's car. Even though Strickland insisted that he had only driven Bell's car the last time he saw Atkins and Bell before the murders, he was made to join a police lineup where the only survivor, Cynthia, pointed him out as one of the criminals. Strickland didn't stop pleading his innocence in court and during investigations. He appeared before 2 juries, and the first one had a black African-American juror present. This juror refused to find him guilty, and as a result of this, the prosecutor in charge of the case did everything in his power to remove black jurors from Strickland's cases, and by the next trial, Strickland was made to stand in front of an all-white jury who didn't waste time in finding him guilty. His innocence was never considered, even though 2 of the actual perpetrators wrote direct statements saying that Strickland was never involved and was watching television at home, as he said. The system that was supposed to protect a young life like Strickland's had been riddled with corruption and racism. Kevin was sentenced to 50 years to life in prison, while the actual killers were sentenced to 20 years, of which they served under 10 years. It would sadden you to know that Kevin spent 43 years in prison, and he was denied retrial every single time he asked for it. The turning point was when Cynthia Douglas later confessed that she was pressured to pick out Strickland by the detectives and police officers. Cynthia tried to have her testimony recanted several times without success. In 2015, the prosecution revealed an email from her where she formally documented her recantation before she died that same year. The tables turned, and before long, there was pressure to get Strickland out of prison. The prosecutor of the county where Strickland was sentenced published a letter on May 10, 2021, saying that she believed that Strickland was innocent. Before then, Strickland had attempted to appeal to the Supreme Court of Missouri, but it was dismissed. The prosecutors of the county, federal prosecutors, and more than 12 lawmakers, among others, petitioned to have Kevin released. The petition was denied in 2021, and the governor of Missouri at the time, Mike Parson, refused to have Strickland released because his case wasn't a priority and he wasn't sure that Strickland was innocent.
Let's just call it what it is. This is wrong. And everyone that works in this system must find a way to do the right thing now. The right thing is getting Mr. Strickland out.
The prosecutors did not stop fighting until they got what they wanted. Strickland was 63 years old by the time he was finally released.
It's going to be the first thing you do if and when you get out.
Well, I mean, I hate people to hear a 62-year-old man say this, but I'm a mama's boy, and I got to go see mama. I got to go hold mama's hand, yeah.
However, the attorney against the release, Eric Schmidt, made sure to slow the process down so Kevin couldn't get his one wish. Strickland's mother died a few months before Strickland was released. Kevin's reaction to getting out eventually after this will not shock you. He was a man dealing with losing the one person he wanted to see the most.
Procedural hurdles caused his case to be delayed and later dismissed. His mother passed away on August 21st.
It does show just how incredibly difficult this process is. Even when the prosecutor is on your side, it took months and months for Mr. Strickland to come home. And he's still going to come home to a system that will not provide him any compensation for the 43 years that he's lost.
The people who heard of Strickland's case created a GoFundMe campaign and raised $1.7 million for him. Despite not receiving any compensation from the state that wrongfully convicted him, he had enough money to do one thing he wanted to do since he couldn't reunite with his mother. Strickland left the prison in a wheelchair due to some heart attacks he had in prison. Speaking of being unfairly punished for crimes he didn't do, Richard Jones endured more hardship than he should have, even in the event that he had committed the offense.
I hope and prayed every day for this day to come, and when it finally got here, it was an overwhelming feeling.
Everything about this case is wild and just wrong. Richard Jones was made to spend 17 years in prison for a crime he knew nothing about. What made this case shocking is that every eyewitness to the robbery had claimed they had seen Jones rob someone. Jones was charged with aggravated robbery in Kansas City in 1999 when he was accused of robbing a woman of her purse in a Walmart parking lot. Jones provided a strong alibi, which many people confirmed. Jones had been at a birthday party that day. The victim had told the police that the person who robbed her looked exactly like Jones. Jones was eventually identified by the eyewitnesses in a lineup and charged with aggravated robbery. The part that would make you angry is that Jones was arrested and charged without any DNA tests conducted to see if there was a match. There was no physical evidence tying Jones to the robbery, and yet Jones was sentenced to prison where he spent 17 years until something was noticed. The man in the lineup, who eyewitnesses claimed was Jones, was never him in the first place. The man who had committed the crime was a dead ringer for Jones, and Jones had been arrested instead of him. This caused the case to be reopened. Jones contacted the Midwest Innocence Project, the same operation that helped our first man, Kevin Strickland, gain his release. They helped him find the real perpetrator, and everyone was shocked to see that Jones had a doppelganger. And like the myths and stories we've heard, doppelgangers do try to ruin your life.
Here's what they found. That's Jones on the right, Amos on the left. Both men with almost identical skin tone, facial hair, and cornrows.
The real suspect was Ricky Amos, and he was eventually brought in and made to stand side by side with Jones for the victim to identify. The eyewitnesses could not tell who was who, and that was when the judge and everyone realized Jones had been serving another man's time. Jones's release was ordered by the court, and he was released on June 8, 2017. Ricky was housed in the same prison where Jones served 17 years for a crime he didn't commit. Crazy, right? Jones's reaction was refreshing to see. You could see that although the state had wronged him for most of his life, he was happy to be free after being wrongfully convicted. A year after Jones was released, he filed a petition where he asked the state to pay him $1.1 million in compensation and publicly announce his innocence. He received $1.1 million, a certificate of innocence, and all of his biological samples about the case were destroyed. He was also granted counseling and permission to have health care benefits. By this time, Jones maintained no ill will towards Ricky and decided that a fresh start was due. Even though this man was innocent of the murder of a teenager almost 22 years ago, he spent 20 years in jail before gaining his freedom.
You want this system to say it made a horrible mistake.
Yes.
On June 19, 1996, in the Bronx, teenager George Collazo was murdered and a man named Richard Rosario was convicted for his murder. Richard's story will fill you with hope for innocent people serving time for a crime they didn't commit, and anger for a failed law enforcement system. George was shot and left to die. 2 weeks later, his friend and someone who owned a food cart were called in to look at a lineup of pictures. The person they picked out as the suspect was 20-year-old Richard Rosario. At the time of the murder, Rosario had been in Florida and had to be called by his parents to be told that he was wanted by the NYPD for the murder of Collazo. He thought his alibi was good enough since he was truly in Florida. However, what he didn't expect was to be arrested and found guilty in only a few hours. He had become the suspect of Collazo's murder. Rosario had only done what was right. He turned himself in, gave his statement, and even gave the police the names of 13 people who knew he was in Florida. He also gave the police the bus ticket he used for the travel, as well as the addresses of the people who saw him in Florida. Why then was Rosario found guilty of murder 2 years later, even though all evidence showed he was innocent? Well, corruption happened in the very system that should have helped him. The Exoneration Initiative was able to get the new district attorney almost 20 years later to re-examine Rosario's case. The way Rosario's life, freedom, and reputation were played with will leave you disgusted.
Every time I think about that cell.
Torres says he was never contacted by New York police. Others on the list reached by NBC News say the same. Rosario was convicted and sentenced to 25 years to life.
As you just heard, the NYPD never investigated or contacted the people that Rosario provided in his alibi. That's not all. What was not mentioned by the people the Exoneration Initiative interviewed was that Collazo's friend never pointed out Rosario in the picture lineup. The other so-called witness, who was also the food cart owner, never saw the gunman in the first place. Nothing was tying Rosario to the murder of Collazo in any way. Due to this devastating discovery, Rosario's case was reopened and he was brought to court after 20 years in prison. It was found out that Rosario was never provided effective legal counsel before he was sentenced for the murder he didn't commit. Rosario made one request as he was being released on March 23, 2016.
The public should know the truth. The families of the victims should have that clarity and that peace of mind that, a murderer is not in the street and that their son received the justice that he deserved.
Rosario's story never changed, and he was eventually released when his name was cleared as he requested in the last clip you just saw. He could be seen beaming for joy when he was finally cleared. That was not all, because he did get compensation. When he was asked how much would have been enough for compensation, he said that no amount of money was enough to get all those years back after the NYPD ruined his life. Rosario's story was a major part of the Dateline podcast. His story and case were thoroughly investigated by Dan Slepian. His story ran through 10 episodes and garnered attention from all over the USA. Richard Rosario was awarded $5 million by a jury in a federal court 6 years after he was released. The saddest part about this man's life was that Rosario had just gotten married when he was arrested. The members of the NYPD at the time Rosario was wrongly convicted never faced the music for what they did to Rosario. However, he decided a fresh start away from the media was the best for him. Next, we explore the chilling case of Jeremy Christian, a man whose violent actions shocked a community and left an indelible mark. The man you just watched is Jeremy Christian. He was found guilty of murdering 2 people in Portland, Oregon. Christian had gone on a rant on a train when he spotted 2 girls on May 26, 2017. He confronted them in what was described as extreme hatred. The girls, who were 17 years old, had been on this train before Christian got up and started saying that they should go back home. He also told them that they were nothing and that they should kill themselves for that reason. Jeremy said a series of insults that could only be described as someone who was very unstable. As Christian continued his full tirade on the young girls, bystanders became irritated with his actions and harassment, so they decided to stop him. However, the men who tried their best to stop him got worse than the girls. Taliesin Mirden Namkaimesh and David Cole Fletcher had tried to prevent Christian from harassing the 2 girls. According to a witness, Namkaimesh had angrily told Christian to get off the train. When Christian refused to get off the train, Fletcher and Namkaimesh decided to shield the girls from Christian. Fletcher then attempted to push him away so he could step back. Christian fell backward and threatened to harm Fletcher if he touched him again. That was when the situation completely escalated. Jeremy stabbed Ricky Best, another man who was nearby, in the chest, and slashed Namkaimesh and Fletcher with the knife. CCTV showed Christian running away from the scene of the murders. Ricky Best died at the scene, and Namkaimesh eventually died at a local hospital. Fletcher survived with critical wounds, and the girls who they were protecting fled the scene as soon as the train stopped. If Jeremy was ready to show remorse for what he did, it wasn't when he was finally arrested a mile away from the crime scene. Christian was recorded at the back of the patrol car he was transported in saying,
I'm all good. I kept next. I'm happy now. I'm happy now. I can rest easy. That's a good one.
Christian said he was happy that he had stabbed both Namkaimesh and Fletcher in the neck, and he did his part as a patriot. Jeremy Christian was charged with aggravated and attempted murder, as well as a felony of possessing a restricted weapon. During one of the trials, one of the women that Christian had harassed on the train gave a victim impact statement, and this caused him to throw a tantrum. He shouted multiple slurs and insulted the judge and the people in the courtroom. It seems that Christian was saying that the woman who had given a victim impact statement should have experienced the same thing Floyd did if he had gotten the chance to do the same to her. After his multiple tantrums and tirades in the courtroom, he was eventually escorted out of the courtroom while he was screaming and yelling insensitive remarks. When Christian's sentence was read, he wasn't in the courtroom. He was given 2 consecutive life sentences, which eventually came up to 51.5 years in prison. What is baffling is that this wasn't the first time that Christian had attempted what he did on the train. The day before he attacked the victims on the train, he had made threats on another train and threw a bottle at a woman. She maced him in retaliation before he got off the train. Now, if you thought that Jeremy Christian was disrespectful to the court, wait until you see the disgusting, unhygienic, and disrespectful habit that Bass Webb brought into the courtroom.
There's no way I want to try this case. I have any further proceedings, or I have to see you for one further second. Set preliminary hearing next week.
The story of this convicted criminal, Bass Webb, will shock you when you realize just how evil a man can get. Bass Webb was accused of causing the death of 2 of his ex-girlfriends in the space of 10 years. He was also charged with running over a pretrial officer and a deputy sheriff for fun after he made a shocking and brutal confession. The reason Webb went to the county jail in the first place was because he had gone to tell the officers that he had just murdered his 31-year-old girlfriend, Bria Runewitz, by beheading her. When the officers tried to stop him, he jumped into the car and tried to escape. Some footage released from Bourbon County Jail showed Webb speeding through the parking lot to hit the 2 officials. One of them got out of the way in time, but the other was not so lucky. The officer sustained injuries, and Webb was caught and arrested after a brief chase. A week later, Webb was arraigned in court for assaulting these officers and murdering Runewitz, appearing in front of Judge Vanessa Dixon of Kentucky County. If Bass ever showed any form of remorse before entering the courtroom, he didn't have any when he got into the courtroom. Judge Dixon told him that she was removing herself from the case because she knew the officials that were attacked. Webb's response was extremely shocking.
Can you word your say?
Yeah.
That be yes?
Yes.
No one ever want to try this case, or have any further proceedings, or I have to see you for one further second. Set preliminary hearing next week.
Webb spat on the judge and she wiped her face before Webb was escorted from the courtroom. In September 2013, Webb was sentenced to 50 years in prison for the murder of his girlfriend. He was called to the courtroom again in July 2014 to receive the punishment for assaulting the officers at the county jail. He was sentenced to 37 years in prison for this offense. Now, if you thought that was all, you would be wrong. Webb was not only a habitual offender, he had done something equally terrible a long time ago. In 2003, Sabrina Vaughn disappeared and her remains weren't found for 7 years. In 2010, after Webb was arrested and awaiting trial, the remains of Vaughn were found buried on a property that belonged to Webb's family. His family had requested a plea deal because they claimed that he was suffering from mental trauma. However, Webb refused to answer the court's order to get a psychological evaluation. When he was eventually tried for this murder in May 2017, Webb showed up with a more disrespectful attitude and look.
A closer look at Webb's recent head tattoos reveals a demented murder hit list. It reads, "Those that must die, all judges, all prosecutors, all cops, the media." Below that, 3 rats have been scratched out, and many more.
During the trial, Webb's behavior showed that he had no respect for the court or remorse for what he did. He was sentenced to life in prison with no option of parole. Initially, he had been granted parole on the condition that he served 20 years in prison. This exemption was canceled during his trial. Webb is being held at the Kentucky Department of Corrections for the rest of his life. Bass Webb's actions in the courtroom were disrespectful to the judge and other law enforcement agents. Wait until you see how Bryce Rhodes disrespected everyone from the judge to the people who suffered from his horrific behavior.
I don't know if y'all got some type of sexual relationship going on. Are you some type of
Bryce Rhodes' actions have been labeled some of the most horrific ones in recent American history. 8 years ago, in 2016, Bryce Rhodes brutally murdered 3 people in Louisville for the worst reasons. He had gone on a killing spree when he killed Christopher Jones, who was a father of 2. He had shot him to death after mistaking him for someone else. That was not the worst part of it, however. 2 brothers, 16-year-old Maurice Gordon and 14-year-old Larry Ordway, had witnessed Rhodes murder Jones. They were in a getaway car waiting for Rhodes when he committed the murder. The brothers only witnessed the murder, but Rhodes went out looking for them and murdered them. Gordon and Ordway were fans of Rhodes in the neighborhood, and according to prosecutor Jones Brown, they were scared after they saw what Rhodes had done. He heard that the boys were telling their family members that Rhodes had killed Jones. 2 other people were involved in the murder of the 2 brothers. Teenagers Anjuan Carter and Ja'Cory Taylor pleaded guilty to helping Rhodes carry out the murders of his victims. Rhodes was afraid that the boys were going to snitch on him. As it turns out, Rhodes used to play basketball with the boys. Rhodes had told his accomplices to vote on whether or not to kill the brothers. The accomplices had lured the boys to Rhodes' home, where all 3 had beaten the victims to death after stabbing them. The brothers' bodies were found more than 10 miles away from the place they lived with their mother. Rhodes and his accomplices had tried to burn the bodies of their victims, but they didn't succeed. Rhodes was arrested and his trial lasted for a long time because Rhodes was extremely disrespectful and rude on multiple occasions. Trials had been postponed many times because his actions indicated mental challenges. He was very unpredictable and messed up court procedures. At some point, no one wanted to stand in for Rhodes because he had fired multiple attorneys and lawyers and even threatened some of them. Rhodes blew kisses to people and families of the victims while in the courtroom. He did this and smirked as he faced the judge. A while after this, he made rude hand gestures towards the boy's mother, and she yelled at him. This caused the judge to call her to order before asking Rhodes why he was smiling in the situation. He answered rudely during his trial.
Mr. Rhodes, you're smiling. I don't know why you're smiling.
Because I can't.
Well?
Because I can't. It's not a crime to smile.
During another court session, Rhodes was forced to wear a mandatory mouthguard because he spat on an attorney before he came into court. He then called said attorney a coward.
Nice cheap shot. You a coward. Nice cheap shot. You a coward.
In a video that was broadcast during another of the court appearances, Rhodes took his disrespect and lack of remorse for what he did to another level. He committed perjury when he made some outrageous accusations which were directed at the judge.
I don't know if y'all got some type of relationship going on. Are you some type of Which one is it?
Or are you just wrong in everything that you say?
Are you a secret Ku Klux Klan member?
On March 13th, 2024, the case that had been pursued for 8 years finally came to a close, with Rhodes' victims getting justice. After the young victim's grandmother and Jones's wife delivered victim impact statements, the jury recommended life in prison for Rhodes. He would have been given the death penalty, but it wasn't allowed because the trial had been delayed earlier in 2018 to test Rhodes' mental competency. Rhodes was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. However, Rhodes' legal team claimed that they had plans to appeal the judge's decision. Their reasons were that Bryce had suffered emotional and physical abuse as a child. However, the prosecutors said it was better if he spent the rest of his life behind bars, as it was safe for families of the victims. Despite this, it seems like Rhodes will spend a long time behind bars even if the sentence is lessened or changed. Compared to his outrageous and disrespectful behavior over the years, Rhodes was quiet as he was led out of the courtroom. Our next case unravels the chilling story of Neil Entwistle, a husband whose dark secrets led to unimaginable tragedy. On January 22, 2006, people living in Hopkinton became concerned about their new neighbors. They had only been living in their home for around 10 days when people stopped seeing them around January 20th. The neighbors in question were Neil Entwistle, his wife, Rachel, and their 9-month-old baby, Lillian. On January 21st, Rachel's friend went to the police and told them that Rachel was missing. So the police went to the house and conducted a small search. There was nothing out of the ordinary, and they assumed no one was home. However, when they went back in the morning of January 22nd, they conducted a deeper search, and in the master bedroom were the bodies of Rachel and Lillian. They were found under a thick piece of bedding, and Entwistle was nowhere to be found. After autopsies were conducted, it was revealed that they had both died of gunshot wounds. At first, no one found the bullet in Rachel until the autopsy. Rachel had been shot in the head with a very small bullet, and Lillian had a bullet in the torso which passed through her and pierced Rachel's left breast. Information reached the police that Entwistle had bought a one-way ticket to London on the 21st of January and left Boston. This caused suspicion, as well as the fact that his DNA was found on the handgun that belonged to his father-in-law. Rachel's DNA was also on the gun's muzzle. Besides this, Entwistle's search history revealed that he had viewed a website describing how to kill people. One other peculiar thing was the fact that Entwistle had gotten $10,000 per month to an offshore account, even though he hadn't been employed for almost a year. He was also up to his neck in debt and under investigation for $30,000 in credit card fraud.
There was no reply. I thought maybe they were, I couldn't hear the shower, but I thought maybe in the bathroom or something, so I didn't.
Because of all these factors, he was declared a person of interest, and police called his parents' home in Worksop, England. During the call, Entwistle told police that he had been out of the house running errands when he came back to find his daughter and wife had been killed. He said that he covered up their bodies and did not call the police because he was so devastated. He then claimed that he decided to end his life with a knife but failed. He drove to his father-in-law's house because he knew he had a handgun. Upon getting there, the house was locked, so he flew to England. Despite this story, an international arrest warrant was issued. Entwistle was arrested at a train station when he was not found in his parents' house. He was then extradited and taken back to the U.S. He was charged with 2 counts of murder, the illegal possession of ammunition and the illegal possession of a firearm. He pleaded not guilty. While awaiting trial, Entwistle was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome after letters to his parents indicated that he may be contemplating suicide. 2 years after the murders, Entwistle was found guilty on all charges after his lawyer failed to get DNA evidence thrown out. Entwistle said nothing to defend himself or call witnesses to the stand. However, at some point he broke down in tears and was confused for laughter at some point. The jury ruled that whoever was paying $10,000 to his account every month had motivated him to murder his family. He was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole on June 25, 2008.
Charging the defendant with murder in the first degree. What say you foreperson? Is the defendant guilty or not guilty?
Guilty of murder in the first degree of Rachel Entwistle.
He appealed this conviction in 2013, but his appeals were rejected. He remains in jail till today. Next up is the disturbing case of Christopher McNabb, a father whose actions shattered trust and left a community reeling.
My 2-week-old is not in her sleeper. Her passy is on the floor.
A mother's desperate 911 call from inside this Georgia home, 40 miles southeast of Atlanta.
She's not in her sleeper. She's not here. I've looked everywhere.
In October 2017, the small town of Newton County, Georgia was rocked by the tragic disappearance of 2-week-old Kalia McNabb. Kalia, who had been born prematurely on September 23rd and weighed only 5 pounds at birth, was reported missing on the morning of October 7th when her mother, Courtney Bell, called the Newton County Police Department to report her infant daughter missing from their trailer. This incident sent shockwaves through the community, as Kalia's disappearance quickly became a cause for concern.
15-day-old Kalia McNabb, home just days ago from the hospital, is missing. The 911 operator keeps Kalia's mother, Courtney Bell, on the phone.
The search for Kalia was intensified. With the help of local volunteers, law enforcement, and canine units, authorities conducted an extensive search around the area where the family lived. However, on October 8th, one day after Kalia was reported missing, the search took an even more sinister turn. Search teams, who were diligently combing through the trailer park where the family resided, stumbled upon a shocking and tragic discovery. Kalia's body, wrapped in blue cloth and placed under a log in a wooded area just a quarter mile away from her home, was found.
But I want my kid back, man. That's my child, man. I want my kid, man.
The next morning, in this wooded area adjacent to the family's mobile home park, searchers make a heartbreaking discovery.
As the investigation continued, authorities swiftly zeroed in on Christopher McNabb, Kalia's father, as the primary suspect in the case. On October 17th, he was formally charged with a slew of offenses related to Kalia's death, including malice murder, felony murder, and concealing a death. Several months later, on January 1st, 2018, Courtney Bell, Kalia's mother, was also charged in the case. The charges against her included concealing a death, false statement, and tampering with evidence.
Now, more than a year and a half after their daughter's tragic death, mother and father are sitting side by side in court as the state of Georgia seeks justice for baby Kalia.
In 2019, Christopher McNabb was convicted of 8 charges, including first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit murder, and tampering with evidence. During the sentencing hearing, Judge John M. Ott addressed Christopher directly and asked him what sentence he would impose upon the guilty party if he were innocent. Without hesitation, Christopher stated that the maximum sentence would be appropriate. To the shock of everyone in the courtroom, Judge John M. Ott decided to impose that very sentence on Christopher.
Then 3 months after the murder, Kalia's mother, Courtney Bell.
Courtney Bell was also found guilty in relation to Kalia's death. While pleading guilty to the murder charge, Courtney acknowledged her substance addiction as a sickness and expressed her love for her babies. However, her remorseful words did little to mitigate her crime severity.
Is also in front of a judge answering for her alleged role in Kalia's death.
During her sentencing hearing, Courtney Bell expressed her regret and remorse for her actions. She claimed that she did her best to be a good mother despite her struggles with substance addiction. In 2023, the Georgia Supreme Court overturned Courtney's conviction, ruling that there was not enough evidence to support the jury's verdict.
Count 1, murder in the second degree. Count 2, cruelty to children in the second degree. And count 3, contributing to the deprivation of a minor felony.
The prosecution's theory revolved around the notion that Courtney was a bad mother for allowing Christopher McNabb, the child's father, to live in the trailer with Kalia and the other children. They argued that Courtney's actions contributed to the neglectful environment that led to Kalia's passing. However, Courtney's attorneys refuted these claims, arguing that there was no evidence linking Courtney's conduct to her daughter's death.
What kind of drugs did you use? Weed. And then, okay. I've been clean for the longest. Yeah.
Courtney's attorneys argued that the prosecution relied on a flawed theory that painted her as a bad mother. They argued that there was no evidence to support the notion that Courtney's actions directly caused her daughter's death. The court ultimately determined that the prosecution failed to show any evidence linking Courtney's conduct to her daughter's death. Courtney Bell's sentence was overturned, and she was released after serving time in prison. However, Christopher McNabb remains behind bars, facing the consequences of his actions. Christopher McNabb's tragic crime left a community devastated, but the next case is just as chilling. Matthew Ponomarenko, a man whose violent actions towards his own family reveal a terrifying and senseless act of destruction.
Matthew Ponomarenko called 911, told a dispatcher he killed his son inside the family's living room. We've chosen not to air that call, but in it, the father says he beat his son to death with a baseball bat.
On March 25, 2021, a shocking incident unfolded in Parma, Ohio, when 34-year-old Matthew Ponomarenko called 911 and confessed to murdering his 5-year-old son, Jax. The dispatcher immediately dispatched officers to the scene, where they discovered a horrific crime scene inside Matthew's home.
From the Russell Avenue home of Matthew Ponomarenko chilled me to the bone. The caller, allegedly 31-year-old Ponomarenko, admits to beating to death with a baseball bat.
Upon arrival, police found Matthew standing in his front yard, seemingly unaffected by what he had just done. Inside the house, police officers found Jax's lifeless body, with multiple blunt force trauma injuries to his head and face. The devastating discovery left everyone in disbelief, and Matthew was arrested and charged with aggravated murder, kidnapping, and endangering children.
His 5-year-old son, Jax, but he wouldn't respond when the 911 operator asked him when or why. He'd only say he was hearing voices, but he didn't elaborate.
As investigators delved into the case, they discovered that Matthew had a history of putting his son Jax in danger. In 2017, Matthew pleaded no contest to a child endangerment case in which he left Jax in the middle of a road, yelled at people in the street, and admitted to using meth and PCP. Jax, Matthew's 5-year-old son, was autistic and nonverbal. He communicated through a tablet.
In 2019, Cuyahoga County conducted an investigation into, quote, parenting issues with the Ponomarenkos, but that case was subsequently closed.
After Jax's lifeless body was found in their home, investigators began their search for answers. What they found was shocking: evidence of mistreatment and torture. The crime scene revealed scenes of severe physical mistreatment, leaving no doubt that Jax had endured unimaginable suffering at the hands of his own father.
First we'll go to a Zoom from County Jail, case number 658361, Matthew Ponomarenko.
Due to the severity of Matthew's crime, he was eligible for the death penalty if convicted. However, 2 years after confessing to murdering his son, Matthew pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, kidnapping, and endangering children. During the sentencing hearing, the prosecution, Michael O'Malley, presented chilling details of the events that unfolded on that fateful day. He told the court that Matthew brutally beat and killed his own son.
I'm standing! All right, we're going to take a break. Deputy, take him into the holding cell, please.
Matthew also had the opportunity to address the court, and his words left a mark on all who listened. In a somber tone, he said, "I'd like to say I'm sorry. It was a small gesture, but it offered little comfort to Jax's family, who had lost their loved one." The judge presiding over the case handed down a sentence that would serve as a reminder of the gravity of the crimes. Matthew was sentenced to life in prison, with a minimum term of 45 years before he would be eligible for parole. Matthew Ponomarenko's crime was horrifying, but the next case takes us to a shocking betrayal within a prominent family. Alex Murdaugh, a once respected lawyer whose web of lies and greed led to the brutal murders of his wife and son.
This is where Alec Murdaugh's life unraveled on June 7th, 2021.
This is your wife and son?
Richard Alexander Alex Murdaugh was a prominent attorney in South Carolina, known for his legal achievements and ties to the powerful and influential. However, behind the facade of wealth and status, whispers of secrets and scandals lurked beneath the surface. On July 8, 2015, 19-year-old nursing student Stephen Smith was found dead 15 miles from Murdaugh's estate in Moselle. His death was initially ruled a hit and run, but suspicions soon arose. As an openly gay man in a small southern town, Stephen's case quickly became the talk of the community.
The investigation revealed no answers as to what happened and who was responsible.
It was an extremely tragic loss for his family.
As the investigation progressed, rumors began to circulate that Stephen had been in a romantic relationship with Buster, the older son of the Murdaugh family. This revelation sparked speculation about the possibility of a cover-up involving other members of the Murdaugh family. In the aftermath of Stephen's death, several witnesses were interviewed, and their statements raised even more questions. They alleged that Buster and Stephen had been in a romantic relationship, further fueling suspicions about the nature of the incident.
Then, all of a sudden, it became one of the stories linked to the Murdaughs and linked to the nation's obsession with justice.
With rumors swirling, many began to question whether the Murdaughs were covering up the truth to protect their reputation and maintain their grasp on power. As of November 2024, there have been no indictments or charges issued in the mysterious murder of Stephen Smith. Despite the ongoing investigation, Buster Murdaugh has publicly denied any involvement in the case, dismissing rumors of his alleged involvement.
She literally helped raise Alec Murdaugh's sons, Paul and Buster.
In 2018, the 57-year-old died after a fall at the Murdaugh estate.
On February 2, 2018, the family's longtime housekeeper, Gloria Satterfield, passed away after suffering a severe head injury. Initially, the incident was labeled as a trip and fall, but no autopsy was performed on Gloria. However, in June 2021, the investigation into her tragic death was upgraded to a criminal investigation.
It was kind of a sad, touching moment when you see Mallory and her boyfriend. I think it's the last moment that anybody captured an image of her alive.
The youngest of the Murdaugh boys, Paul Murdaugh, found himself in hot water in February 2019. He was charged with 3 felonies after his friend Mallory Beach died in a boating accident. Paul, who was driving the boat, had a blood alcohol level of .286, 3 times over the legal limit.
County Deputy Sheriff Stephen Domino was one of the first on the scene. After Domino got Mallory's distraught boyfriend Anthony Cook into his patrol car.
According to Connor Cook, one of the teens on board the boat when Mallory Beach died, Alex Murdaugh had encouraged him to protect Paul during the investigation. This allegation sparked an inquiry by SLED, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, into whether the police had charged Paul in relation to Mallory's death due to pressure.
Maggie and Paul were murdered on Carlson County property in June of 2021. The 1,700-acre property was used as a hunting lodge for the family.
However, despite all the legal troubles that the Murdaugh family might have encountered, they're nothing compared to what happened on June 7, 2021. At 10:06 p.m., Alex Murdaugh called 911 from his cell, reporting that he had found his 22-year-old son Paul and 52-year-old wife Maggie near the dog kennels at the Murdaugh family hunting lodge in Islandton.
Investigators interviewed Murdaugh in a patrol car.
My boy over there, I could see it was.
When the police arrived at the scene, they found Paul and Maggie shot with at least 2 different weapons. They spoke to Alex at the scene, who claimed at the time of the shooting he had been visiting his ill mother. Yet, the detectives' investigation soon focused on Alex Murdaugh for the murders of his wife and son.
He was indicted on dozens more charges for defrauding clients out of millions of dollars. And then in July of 2022, more than a year after the grisly murders,
nearly 1 year after the devastating murders, Alex Murdaugh found himself at the center of a maelstrom of controversy and suspicion. The prosecution put forth a compelling argument, claiming Alex's motive for committing these heinous crimes was to distract from the various financial crimes that were about to come to light. It was alleged that Alex sought to garner public sympathy and divert attention away from his wrongdoings.
At the kennels at 8:44 p.m. on the night Maggie and Paul were murdered.
I was.
Come here, Baba.
Come here, Cash. Come here, Baba. Cash.
You continued lying after that night, did you not?
But once I lied, I continued to lie. Yes, sir.
On March 2, 2023, Alex Murdaugh stood trial for the murders of his wife, Maggie, and their son, Paul. After an extensive legal process, a jury found him guilty on both counts, handing down 2 consecutive life sentences. The verdict was met with mixed emotions, as some felt justice had been served, while others remained skeptical of the prosecution's claims.
The shooter's covered in blood. The shooter's gun is covered in blood. Common sense thing here is there were 2 shooters.
Alex Murdaugh appealed to the state Supreme Court despite his conviction. His fate currently remains in the hands of the highest court in South Carolina. While his sentence brings closure to the case, many questions remain unanswered. Alex Murdaugh's shocking betrayal of his own family left a trail of devastation, but the next case is just as haunting. Philip Snyder, a man whose violent actions, fueled by anger and obsession, led to a senseless and brutal crime.
Philip Snyder and his wife Roberta, known as Bobby, both in their 70s, lived here on St. Abigail Street until Bobby's brother finds out she's missing.
In a small town in Ohio, a disturbing case unfolded. Philip Snyder, a 73-year-old man, claims his wife Roberta died unexpectedly while they were on a road trip to Graceland. However, the details of this story raise suspicions and leave investigators questioning what really happened.
She choked on a phlegm. She'd been choking for quite a year.
He says she died in this truck when they got to Memphis. Phil was taking Bobby, a lifelong Elvis Presley fan.
Initially, Philip told Roberta's loved ones they were traveling to Memphis when the tragedy occurred. He claimed that they flagged down a passing ambulance in a restaurant parking lot, and the ambulance took Roberta's body away. According to Philip, Roberta was subsequently cremated.
You remember the checkers, passing the checkers?
Yeah, I think it could have been checkers, maybe.
Police thumbed through his receipts looking for clues.
We're trying to find your wife.
However, the Hartford police in Ohio, where Philip and Roberta resided, began questioning Philip's claims. They contacted the authorities in Memphis, where Philip alleged Roberta had passed away, but no one could locate her body. Faced with mounting evidence, the detectives confronted Philip. Philip's initial story crumbles, and he changes his story. He now claims that Roberta died while they were in between Columbus and Cincinnati, while they were on their way to Memphis.
They move to the kitchen where Phil goes through Bobby's purse. He finds her license. That's the breaking point for Chief Larry Dordea.
Because Roberta wanted to be with nature and not on someone's shelf, Philip told the detectives he threw Roberta's body off a bridge on I-40 in Tennessee. However, when drivers and search teams scoured the area, they didn't find any sign of Roberta. With Philip's constantly changing narrative and the absence of Roberta's body, investigators are left searching for the truth. They work tirelessly to piece together the events leading up to Roberta's disappearance and death.
Oh my goodness, I feel so bad. I feel so bad. I'm so sorry, you guys.
As the investigation into Roberta's disappearance continued, Philip attempted to take his own life. However, family members were able to intervene and save him. While Philip was in the hospital recovering from his attempted suicide, investigators descended on his and Roberta's home in Hartville.
Changes everything for her husband, Phil.
He is looking at a red bin.
There's no body here, but there's a very bad smell in this tote.
The canine hits on this red container.
He won't leave it.
Investigators were confident that they could find answers in the couple's home. Evidence was mounting against Philip, and detectives were determined to gather more evidence against him. Among the items searched in the house, cadaver dogs stumbled upon a piece of Roberta's sweater stained with human blood.
He came back to it three times.
Police find what looks like blood inside of it. Plastic bags with possible blood and the front of a sweatshirt cut out with Hartville, Ohio on it.
The DNA on the sweater matched Roberta's, confirming her connection to the bloodstain. This piece of evidence further strengthened the case against Philip. The detectives, already skeptical of his version of events, were even more convinced that he was responsible for Roberta's disappearance.
Police confront him with the new evidence.
I didn't cut the shirt. I didn't cut any shirt off.
Yeah, the science says that's not true.
The web of lies continue to frustrate investigators.
Determined to get to the bottom of the case, the detectives decided to pay a visit to Philip at the hospital. Once again, Philip changed his account and claimed that Roberta had died while at home in Hartville. According to Philip, he had disposed of her body in a trash bag and thrown it into the Tennessee River.
The Tennessee River in Benton County, 150 miles northeast of Memphis, turned up nothing.
You're guilty of something.
I'm not. I didn't kill my wife.
Still searching for the truth, police get creative.
However, the detectives didn't believe Philip's story. They realized he had previously been inconsistent in his statements and suspected he was trying to cover his tracks. Determined to get to the bottom of the case, the detectives devised a cunning plan. The detectives recruited a 50-year-old undercover officer from the Hartville police force. This undercover operative, a woman, would approach Philip under the guise of friendship and gain his trust.
Walks into the Burger King in Hartville.
Now, do they have good coffee here? Really?
She strikes up a conversation with Phil.
Yeah, I just got divorced in Cincinnati. I got 2 grown kids.
Over the next few weeks, the undercover officer began meeting with Philip for coffee on a daily basis. They shared stories about their personal lives, and the officer even confided in him about her dying mother, who was supposedly suffering in hospice. She even went so far as to express her desire for her mother to pass already, and even considered ending her life.
Recording everything on a hidden camera. She starts showing up at Burger King at 6 a.m. when Phil and his friends meet for coffee every day.
We have assigned seats here.
You do, don't you?
As the officer continued to persist with her emotional tactics, the pressure mounted on Philip. The constant reminders of his wife's death and the undercover officer's feigned vulnerability became too much for him to bear. Finally, Philip confessed the truth behind Roberta's disappearance.
Phil starts to talk about how Bobby died. This time, he says she was asleep on the couch, fell off and hit her head, and she landed on a plastic tarp on the floor she had out for arts and crafts.
On January 2nd, 2017, Roberta and Philip were involved in a heated argument. The argument escalated, and Roberta made the decision to go to bed while sitting on a love seat. The following morning, Philip woke up and went downstairs for coffee. On his return, he reportedly discovered that Roberta was still asleep. In a chilling twist, Philip grabbed a drop cloth and placed it over Roberta's head. He then took a 2-pound steak hammer and struck her repeatedly in the head.
He pleaded guilty to murdering his wife of 53 years, tampering with evidence, and abuse of a corpse. As part of the deal, he had to tell police where they can find Bobby's body.
After committing the murder, Philip decided to dispose of Roberta's body. He wrapped a plastic bag around her head, rolled her body in a strap, and placed her in a plastic container. Philip then drove with her remains, disposing of her in various places between Ohio and Tennessee. In August 2018, Philip pleaded guilty to aggravated murder, tampering with evidence, and gross abuse of a corpse. The judge sentenced him to life in prison with parole eligibility after 20 years. Philip Snyder's violent crime was a terrifying act of rage, but the next case is just as unsettling. Carlson, a man whose cold and calculated actions led to a senseless tragedy.
That had actually happened to Carlson before. Back in 1991, Carl's first wife, Christina, Levi's mother, also died in a tragic accident.
On New Year's Day 1991, firefighters responded to a fire at Carl and Christina Carlson's home in Murphy's, California. The call came in around 2:30 p.m., and the first responders arrived on the scene to find Carl standing outside, covered in soot and burns. Carl informed them that he had successfully rescued his 3 children from the blaze, but unfortunately, his wife Christina was still trapped inside.
In a tragic accident, a house fire.
Looks good, you guys.
Carl and Christina were living here in Murphy's, California, with their 3 young children, says her sister Colette.
Firefighters entered the burning structure with the sole purpose of finding Christina. Their search led them to the bathroom, where they made the devastating discovery of her body. Christina had been tragically trapped in the bathroom, unable to escape the flames that had engulfed the room.
Carlson had taken out a $200,000 life insurance policy on his wife.
That doesn't sound like a lot by today's standards, but in 1991, it was a lot of money.
The investigation into the fire began immediately, with a team of fire investigators working tirelessly to determine the cause of the blaze. Their initial findings pointed towards a fire that had originated outside the bathroom, where Christina had been bathing, and Carl was working in the garage. This theory led investigators to believe Christina had been unaware and helpless in the face of the fire's relentless advance.
When I found out that it was boarded, I just was in shock.
Carlson told investigators the pane had broken, so he temporarily covered the window to keep the cold out.
However, there were several things at the scene that raised suspicion. The window in the bathroom where Christina was killed was boarded up, causing investigators to question Carl's version of events. Carl offered an explanation for the missing window pane. He claimed that they could not afford to put in a pane.
Carlson told police that Christina was in the bathroom when some kerosene that had spilled suddenly erupted in flames.
Additionally, the odor of kerosene was prominent in the home, leading investigators to question why the fuel scent was so overpowering. Once again, Carl seemed to have an explanation for this. He claimed that he accidentally spilled a container of kerosene while attempting to heat the home days earlier, and it somehow fit into the rug.
Was finally having suspicions of her own, according to police. One big reason? Police say she'd found out Carl had recently taken...
As the investigators were still piecing together the events surrounding Christina's death and the fire, it came as a surprise when Carl suddenly moved to Seneca, New York, with his daughters Erin and Katie and son Levi. This decision raised even more suspicions among Christina's family, as they firmly believe Carl had a hand in her demise. However, the official manner of death for Christina was ruled as an accident in March 1991.
A $1.2 million life insurance policy on her, although Carlson later denied it. She agreed to wear a wire, pretending to Carl.
This ruling left Christina's family feeling frustrated and disillusioned. They knew in their hearts that something more sinister was at play, but their attempts to bring the truth to light fell short. The insurance company, which was the beneficiary of Christina's life insurance policy, paid a hefty sum of over $215,000 to Carl after the manner of death was concluded.
While he was underneath it, the truck slipped off the jacks that were holding it up.
Okay, we're going to start CPR, okay?
Carl, they want to start CPR. Do you know CPR?
For Carl, it appeared he had moved on with his life. He settled on a farm and married Cindy Best. It seemed that tragedy had finally passed by the Carlson family. However, on November 20th, 2008, Cindy called 911, informing the dispatcher that a truck had fallen off the jack and that her 23-year-old stepson Levi was stuck underneath, not breathing.
It was all ruled a tragic accident, a once-in-a-lifetime tragedy.
When the police and the paramedics arrived at the scene, it became evident that Levi was already dead. The tragedy had struck the Carlson family once again, leaving everyone in disbelief and grief. According to Carl, Levi had been crushed under the weight of the vehicle, which weighed half a ton.
But then in 2012, another member of the family contacted the New York police. That's when Lieutenant Investigator John Clear got involved for the first time and started checking out.
However, as the story unfolded, suspicions began to grow. The detectives investigating the death soon learned that Carl had taken out life insurance policies on both Christine, his deceased first wife, and Levi just days before their passing. Even more suspicious was the fact that Carl was the beneficiary of both policies.
Now living apart from Carlson, was finally having suspicions of her own, according to police. One big reason? Police say she'd found out Carl.
4 years later, in 2012, the case took an unexpected turn. The detectives made contact with Cindy, Carl's estranged wife, who provided them with crucial information. Cindy revealed that there were discrepancies in Carl's version of events, with the evidence stacking up against Carl. The detectives decided to reopen Levi's death investigation. They began piecing together the clues, unraveling a web of deceit that pointed directly to Carlson as the prime suspect.
Exclusive, you're about to hear part of that conversation for the first time.
Can you just tell me how things went that day so that I know in my head?
In an exclusive interview with the detectives, Cindy painted a disturbing picture of Carl's abusive and controlling behavior. She described him as a narcissistic man who exerted total control over all aspects of her life. Determined to uncover the truth, Cindy decided to take a bold step and wore a wire, allowing her to record conversations about Carl and Levi's death.
If you pushed the truck and you said yes.
I didn't push the truck, I said I had nothing to do, but I said I took advantage of the situation once it happened.
As Cindy spoke to Carl and gathered evidence, she expected a confession. However, to her disappointment, Carl remained steadfast in his denial. Cindy's efforts were not in vain despite the lack of a confession. During the conversation, Carl made a statement that seemed to incriminate himself. This crucial piece of information would pave the way for his eventual arrest.
Please bring Carlson in for questioning.
So, the reason that they brought you in today to finally talk to you was really over
my son, Levi.
Under intense questioning, Carl's story took a surprising turn. He now claimed that he accidentally dropped the truck on his son Levi, leaving him unconscious. Panicked, Carl fled the scene and called 911 when he returned. However, his story did not add up, and there were inconsistencies in his account. As the pressure mounted, Carl's narrative continued to change, leaving detectives suspicious about his true role in Levi's tragic death.
His lawyer, speaking on his behalf, says he respectfully disagrees with the court's recent decision to allow the jury to hear the recorded conversations Carl Carlson had with his wife.
Carl Carlson was charged with second-degree murder in the death of his son. Faced with overwhelming evidence, Carl eventually pleaded guilty to second-degree murder and was sentenced to 15 years in prison. It was a bittersweet victory for investigators, knowing that justice had been served, but mourning the loss of an innocent life.
Her office is now actively investigating the death as a homicide and cannot comment on an active investigation. But now, even with Carl Carlson in jail awaiting trial,
as the case progressed, detectives turned their sights on Carl's deceased wife, Christina. The circumstances surrounding her death had always seemed suspicious, and new evidence began to surface that implicated Carl. After a thorough investigation, it was concluded that Carl had murdered Christina as well.
Carl Carlson knew his sentence would be 15 to life as he was brought to the Seneca County Courthouse in Waterloo. His family knew it too, and several relatives, including one of his brothers, told us they were let down.
In 2020, Carl's trial for the murder of his wife began. The jury found Carl guilty of first-degree murder. mirroring his prior conviction for his son's murder. Carl's sentence was swift and final: life in prison without the possibility of parole. Our next case is Chris Watts, a man whose seemingly perfect life masked unimaginable darkness.
She was such a good person and such a good wife to him.
He is amazing. I can't tell you how wonderful he is.
How could he have done something like that to her?
The Watts family, consisting of Chris and Shannon Watts and their two daughters, Bella and Celeste, commonly known as Cece, captivated social media with their seemingly perfect lives. Their picture-perfect portrayal of a happily married couple presented an idealized reality. However, behind closed doors, a different story was unfolding that would shock the world.
Oh, look at this.
She just was a ball of love. I don't know. It sounds like too good to be true, but
but it really was.
She really, yeah.
In 2018, Shannon had exciting news to share with her husband. She informed him she was pregnant with their third child, a boy. To support his family, Chris had a successful career at Anadarko Petroleum, working as a petroleum engineer. On the other hand, Shannon took on the role of a stay-at-home mother, managing the family and caring for their two young daughters. However, she had also become involved in the MLM industry, selling a product called Thrive for a company called Louisville.
That is what a really good friend does. A really good friend knows something's wrong and does that.
She got there and there was no answer, so I texted Chris.
On August 13, 2018, the world was shaken by the tragic disappearance of Shannon Watts and her daughters Bella and Cece. In the hours following Shannon's disappearance, Chris acted unemotionally, not worried, and lackadaisical. He seemed unaffected by the situation, leading many to believe he had something to hide. This lack of concern and urgency raised suspicions and fueled speculation among investigators and family members.
This is him at 517.
We can see the garage door open. There's some kind of movement that can be seen.
Clearly parked out there on the side and get everything but in.
However, things started to change when Chris's neighbor approached the police with security camera footage, showing Chris leaving and re-entering his house and car several times the night before. The footage raised suspicions as it seemed to contradict Chris's claims that he had spent the entire evening at work.
Watching his reaction when everybody is watching this and then turn and look at him, his demeanor changes almost immediately.
Upon viewing the security camera footage, Chris became visibly nervous. The calm and unbothered demeanor he had maintained up until that point vanished. Instead, he displayed signs of nervousness, fidgeting, and stammering while answering questions from the police.
Police looking for a pregnant Frederick woman and her two children who have seemingly vanished without a trace.
Denver 7's Thomas Hoppe spoke with the woman's husband.
Did you guys get into an argument before she left?
When the detectives investigating Shannon, Bella, and Cece's disappearance questioned Chris Watts, he said he was unaware of their whereabouts. In a heartfelt plea to the media outlets, Chris begged for Shannon and the girls to come home. However, 2 days after their families were reported missing, Chris failed a polygraph examination regarding his wife and daughter's disappearance.
To make them vanish.
You have not shed one tear in 2 days that you've been here.
No.
Not one.
After speaking with his father, Chris confessed to the detectives that his wife, Shannon, had killed their daughters in a fit of rage. According to Chris, he had killed Shannon in a fit of anger because he was so upset. However, it later came to light that Chris actually murdered Shannon in cold blood before smothering his two daughters, Bella and Cece. Chris then proceeded to dispose of all three bodies by driving them to his worksite and leaving them in crude oil vats. This act not only demonstrated a disregard for human life, but also revealed a chilling level of planning and premeditation.
From father and husband to triple murder suspect, arrested overnight, Chris Watts is accused of killing his pregnant wife Shanann and their two daughters.
On August 21, 2018, Chris Watts was arrested and charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and a slew of other charges. 3 months later, on November 6th, Chris pleaded guilty to the charges against him. He was sentenced to 5 life sentences without parole and an additional 48 years because Shannon was pregnant at the time of her death. Furthermore, Chris received 36 years for tampering with deceased bodies.
The defendant coldly and deliberately ended 4 lives. Not in a fit of rage, not by way of accident, but in a calculated and sickening manner.
Disgustingly, while incarcerated, Chris has gathered a following of lonely women who have written to him, expressing admiration despite his heinous crimes. Chris even has the audacity to make allegations from behind bars, blaming Shannon for everything that occurred and labeling her as a control freak. Unlike Chris Watts, who committed a heinous crime by murdering his family in cold blood, Colby Allen Parker committed an even more disturbing act when he killed and mutilated his grandfather in a horrific incident.
A Florida man is charged with killing his 77-year-old grandfather, Ronald Wells Sr., and cutting off the man's ears. According to the police report, while he was being questioned.
In 2021, the small town of DeLand, Florida was gripped by a shocking case of violence and murder. The local authorities were called to a residence on reports of a stabbing. When police officers arrived on the scene, they were met with a gruesome sight. Colby Allen Parker, a young man covered in blood, was frantically trying to explain what had happened. Nearby lay the body of an older man with multiple stab wounds evident on his body.
About the death, Colby Parker pulled the human ears from his pocket. CBS affiliate WPEC reports the Lake County Sheriff's Office responded to a home in Central Florida.
Colby informed the officers that the person lying nearby was his grandfather. As the officers examined the grandfather's body, they noticed stab wounds all over it. This disturbing discovery raised even more questions. While officers were examining the grandfather, another officer approached Colby for questioning. According to Colby, his grandfather had attempted to hurt him, but he managed to wrestle away the knife and fatally stab his grandfather in the heart.
Saturday night for reports of a man being attacked by his grandfather. According to deputies, Parker claims Wells pulled a knife on him.
The most shocking revelation of the case came when Colby pulled a pair of severed human ears from his pockets. These ears, it later turned out, belonged to his grandfather. Colby had gruesomely cut off the ears of his deceased grandfather after killing him.
To get the knife away, then used it against Wells in what he called self-defense. Investigators say Parker admitted to cutting his grandfather multiple times.
During the investigation, Colby tried to steal a gun from an officer. Additionally, he also attempted to grab a taser, further illustrating his violent behavior. The altercation escalated, and the officers found themselves in a life-or-death struggle. Despite the deployment of a taser, Colby's aggression remained determined.
The butcher's knife also hitting him multiple times with a baseball bat, and they say he also admitted to cutting Wells' ears off and stated he wanted his grandfather to be with his dead grandmother.
As the investigation unfolded, investigators uncovered a disturbing scene within Colby's home. In the main bedroom, they discovered an apron with the words "The Family Butcher" emblazoned on it. Attached to the apron were two fake plastic human ears, an eerie discovery. Moving deeper into Colby's living space, investigators stumbled upon a chilling sight. A bloody baseball bat and butcher's knife lay nearby, with blood dripping from the blade. The sight sent shivers down their spines.
Junior?
Yeah. Where's Junior?
Ronnie Junior, right here.
Ronnie. Okay, what is that?
Those are ears.
Based on the evidence gathered, Colby was charged with second-degree murder and assaulting an officer. His bail was denied, ensuring he remained behind bars until his trial. During interviews with investigators, Colby shockingly confessed the truth behind his crimes. He claimed that his grandfather's death was not a random act of violence, but rather a calculated act. Colby's motive was to reunite his grandfather with his deceased grandmother, which he felt was the only way to achieve closure. Colby Allen Parker's chilling crime was a devastating act of violence, but the next case is just as unsettling. Joshua Amberie, a man whose brutal actions were driven by rage, leaving a victim's life shattered.
Skyview 12 shows us the home where Melissa Amberie was stabbed. Now we'll pan over to the house where a neighbor says he spotted that suspect, Joshua Amberie, on his back patio.
A 39-year-old man named Joshua Amberie was arrested in Claremont County, Ohio in November 2022 after allegedly stabbing his mother, 58-year-old Melissa Amberie, several times. The tragic incident unfolded at the Amberie home in Miami Township, where police found Melissa in the basement. Due to the severity of the injuries she sustained, authorities were forced to airlift her by helicopter to the University of Cincinnati Medical Center. However, despite the best efforts of medical professionals, Melissa was pronounced dead upon arriving at the hospital.
That suspect, Joshua Amberie, on his back patio. That's where we pick up from a body camera on a Miami Township police officer.
Police, let me see your hands. Drop the knife.
At the time of the incident, Joshua was under court-imposed community control, a type of probation alternative to incarceration for a previous offense. Under community control, the defendant is given a set of conditions to avoid imprisonment. However, it appears that Joshua's compliance was lacking, as he violently attacked his own mother.
Officers shouted at Amberie to drop the knife several more times while holding him at gunpoint. The officer whose body camera we're watching decides to holster his handgun, pulls out his taser.
I got lethal, I got a taser.
When police arrived at the Amberie home, Joshua had fled the scene, leaving behind the knife he had used to stab her. Officers immediately launched a search for Joshua in the surrounding area. After an extensive search, they eventually found him on the back patio of a nearby home.
Got lethal, I got a taser.
As we zoom in, we can see Amberie's not listening and holds the knife up in a threatening manner.
Hell's coming at me.
The second officer fires 2 shots.
When officers arrived on the scene, they were greeted by 20-year-old Joshua, who was wielding a knife and refusing to comply with their commands. Despite the officers' repeated commands to drop the knife, Joshua continued to whirl the weapon, posing a significant threat to the safety of both himself and the responding officers. Recognizing the heightened nature of the situation, one police officer made the decision to deploy non-lethal force by using a taser. However, the taser missed Joshua, leaving him still armed with the knife.
2 shots, one of which hits Amberie in the leg. As he goes down, you can see the knife tumbling away from him in this freeze frame.
Lay down! Lay down! Lay down!
With the situation continuing to escalate, a second police officer felt obligated to take action. In self-defense and to prevent further harm, they fired at Joshua, striking his leg. Joshua was tackled to the ground, immobilized by the gunshot wound. Once Joshua was subdued and on the ground, officers approached and administered immediate medical attention. They applied a tourniquet to his leg to staunch the bleeding and stabilize his condition. With Joshua's life hanging in the balance, officers called for a helicopter to transport him to a nearby hospital for medical treatment.
I talked with Chief Mills about how his officers responded.
When dealing with knives and pipes and things like that we are going to make an attempt to de-escalate.
Joshua was taken to the hospital where he received treatment for his injury. After his release, he was placed in police custody and charged with several offenses related to the confrontation with police. The chief of the Miami Township Police Department addressed the media, calling the outcome of Joshua's arrest unfortunate. However, he emphasized that his officers were forced into the situation and were forced to make split-second decisions.
Gap that we have, the safety gap, we have no other option than to use the force available to us at that time.
The police chief added that one of the officers who responded to the call had contemplated leaving the department due to the psychological trauma they experienced during the encounter. In October of 2023, nearly a year after his arrest, Joshua pleaded guilty to aggravated murder and 1 count of felonious assault on a police officer in a plea deal.
Were the best years of my life I had with Melissa.
During those 42 years, Ted and Melissa Amberie built a beautiful life. 4 kids, 7 grandkids, and a lifetime to spend together.
During the sentencing hearing, Joshua's siblings pleaded with the judge to give their now 40-year-old brother a lengthy prison sentence because of the psychological hurt they have gone through. Jacob, Joshua's brother, told Judge Haddad that he would feel relieved when this was all over and that he hoped to get justice for their mother.
He picked up that knife. Today is the last day you will ever hear my voice, see my face, and look me in the eye.
Powerful words from family members who vowed to cut ties with Joshua.
Judge Haddad listened intently to the heartfelt pleas of Joshua's siblings and considered the profound impact of his actions on their family. He ultimately made the decision to sentence Joshua to 30 years for his mother's murder and 11 years for the assault on the police during his arrest. Furthermore, Judge Haddad ordered that the sentence for the murder of Joshua's mother be served consecutively rather than concurrently. According to Judge Haddad, this decision was made to protect the public and prevent any further harm. While Joshua Amberie's act of taking his own mother's life is horrible, it pales in comparison to the unimaginable horror of Cynthia Verela's heinous crime.
Police say it was one of the worst child abuse cases they've ever seen. According to investigators, Verela Casaus abused her son Omari and beat him to death 3 years ago.
In 2013, a 9-year-old boy named Omari Verela Casaus lost his young life at the hands of his own mother. Omari's younger sister, who was only 5 years old at the time, witnessed the tragic events and tried to intervene, urging their mother to stop kicking and hitting him. Unfortunately, her pleas were ignored. According to Omari's loved ones, he had been subjected to relentless mistreatment at the hands of his biological mother, Cynthia, over his short life. The autopsy conducted on Omari's body revealed he had sustained severe internal bleeding from blunt force trauma. This devastating discovery shattered any hopes that Omari had fallen from a toy horse, as Cynthia initially claimed.
Casaus answered our questions while being taken to jail.
It was an accident. I was disciplining him and I kicked him the wrong way. It was an accident.
When detectives questioned Cynthia about her son's death, she initially denied any involvement. However, as the evidence against her mounted, her claims of innocence began to crumble. The inconsistencies in her statements and the overwhelming physical evidence ultimately led the police to charge Cynthia with murder in relation to Amberie's death.
It was recommended Verela Casals remain jailed on $100,000 cash-only bond.
The state's concurring. We believe $100,000 cash only.
In an attempt to evade justice, Cynthia tried to claim she was incompetent to stand trial. However, the judge ruled otherwise, determining that she was mentally fit to stand trial. Cynthia's husband, Amberie's stepfather, was found guilty of tampering with evidence and acting with reckless disregard for human life. He was sentenced to life in prison.
Is fit to stand trial after allegedly killing her 9-year-old son, Amberie. This comes just months after her husband, Stephen Casals, was put behind bars.
Astonishingly, the judge decided to give him a reduced sentence of 14.5 years, as he has already served 9 years in prison. This reduction means that the stepfather will be released in just 5 more years. In May of 2016, Cynthia pleaded guilty to 6 counts, including second-degree murder. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison in a stunning plea deal.
Cynthia Verela Casals, CR 2014-00203.
During her sentencing, Cynthia spoke of her love for Amberie, breaking down in tears as she addressed the judge. Despite her crimes, she expressed her remorse and begged for forgiveness. However, her sister Sylvia, who had adopted Cynthia's surviving children, had a different story to tell.
I will never understand why all this happened, Your Honor. My sister will have to live with that, what she did to her child Amberie.
Sylvia addressed the court, expressing her forgiveness towards her sister. However, she made it clear that she wanted to see Cynthia face a long sentence. She shed light on the tender age of Amberie at the time of his death, emphasizing that he had dreams and goals that he would never get to fulfill. Cynthia's other children, who saw the assault on Amberie, asked Sylvia, "Auntie, can't Amberie be fixed? Can't God or the doctor fix him?"
All right.
In a powerful and emotional letter, Cynthia's daughter wrote to the judge, expressing her desire for her mother to remain behind bars. The letter, which was read aloud during the sentencing hearing, left the courtroom in tears. Cynthia's daughter, now 7 years old, bravely expressed her deepest fears and the nightmares that still haunt her. Her words echoed the sentiments of countless victims of domestic violence, urging the judge to keep her mother away to protect her safety and well-being. Cynthia Verela's shocking crime was a moment of unthinkable violence, but the next case is equally disturbing. Marie Jitani, a woman whose brutal actions towards an innocent victim reveal a chilling disregard for life.
January, 40-year-old Marie Jitani pled guilty to the December 2013 murder of her husband, Tony. He was stabbed to death in the couple's North Bexar County home.
On the night of December 5, 2013 at 9:30 p.m., a Bexar County Sheriff's deputy responded to a domestic violence call at the Jitani residence. The deputy arrived to witness a heated altercation between 29-year-old Tony and 38-year-old Marie. Tony, who had expressed a desire to leave, found himself in a confrontation with his wife, who refused to let him leave the house.
To stab her husband, 29-year-old Tony Jihani, to death. According to the police report, he was stabbed 17 times, 3 times as emergency responders arrived at the couple's Northwest Bexar County home.
According to deputy statements, Marie grabbed a knife and stabbed Tony multiple times in the upper body. The deputy intervened and tried to subdue Marie, but it was already too late. Tony succumbed to his injuries and was pronounced dead at University Hospital.
She's since changed her mind about that plea.
I am not guilty of what they're saying that I did in cold blood.
In the aftermath of the tragic incident, Marie was arrested and charged with her husband's murder. Her bond was set at $250,000. 3 years later, in February 2016, District Judge Steve Hilbig sentenced Marie to 25 years in prison as part of a plea deal.
I am guilty of defending my life and my children's.
She claims she had ineffective counsel, that her lawyers only wanted to talk about a plea bargain.
During Marie's sentencing hearing, Alfred Jitani, Tony's father, delivered a powerful and emotional statement to the court, addressing his daughter's killer directly. He declared, "I do not forgive you for murdering Tony, my son. I curse you for what you have done. I wish you nothing but terrible things in this life, and that when you die, you burn in hell."
We didn't talk about trial, we didn't talk about strategy, we didn't talk about anything like that.
And that her lawyer, David Christian, rushed her into agreeing to the plea bargain that called for a 25-year prison term.
Tony's mother, Jamal Jitani, also had the opportunity to address Marie. With tears streaming down her face, she expressed her anger and desire for justice. She stated, "I pray that you rot in your prison cell."
And that called for a 25-year prison term.
Christian took exception to Jitani's testimony. He said they went over the plea agreement several times.
Under the laws, Anna-Marie is obligated to serve half of her sentence before becoming eligible for parole. However, despite pleading guilty, she sought a new trial 2 months after sentencing. Anna-Marie said she had ineffective counsel when she accepted the plea deal.
He testified that she was not rushed into signing. He said that he advised her that given the facts of the case, a plea bargain was in her best interest.
Other than being under immense amount of pressure.
In her request for a new trial, Anna-Marie argued that her legal counsel failed to provide adequate representation and advice. She believed that if she had been properly guided, she would have made a different decision regarding the plea deal. However, her attorneys, David Christian and Pat Hancock, insisted that they had thoroughly reviewed the case with Anna-Marie and concluded that taking a plea deal was in her best interests.
She was not coerced, threatened, led the wrong way.
Judge Steve Hilbig denied Jitani's motion for a new trial. Her lawyer tells me he'll appeal.
Despite the efforts of her legal team, Judge Hilbig denied Anna-Marie's plea for a retrial. The judge deemed the evidence presented insufficient to overturn the initial verdict. Anna-Marie's newest attorney spoke to the media, stating that he plans to appeal the recent ruling. This new attorney, who has joined the case amidst much speculation, believes there are valid grounds for an appeal. Our next case is Joanna Deni, a woman whose chilling crimes shocked an entire nation.
Listen, Joanna Deni is today constantly smiling in front of bereaved families at times when she showed nothing but utter disrespect for everything and everybody in that courtroom today.
In March 2013, 3 men were found with similar stab wounds in Peterborough, England. 2 other men were also stabbed similarly, but they survived. The perpetrator? 30-year-old Joanna Deni. Joanna Deni was an absent mother to 2 children, and she would often run away from home for long periods and buried herself in drugs and drinks. She was bored and was looking for a thrill. Joanna was obsessed with Bonnie and Clyde and wanted to be like them. So, she decided to kill people for the fun of it and began the horrific adventure in March 2013. On the 30th of March 2013, a man named Kevin Lee was found in a ditch near Newborough. His body was clothed in a black sequin dress. He had been stabbed multiple times. Lee was reported missing a day before he was found in the ditch by his wife, and his car was also burned that day. Lee was a landlord and Joanna was his tenant. She was often seen with a convicted criminal named Gary Stretch. It was soon revealed that Joanna and Lee were lovers. On Lee's phone, Dennehy's name and details were seen multiple times, particularly when Lee went missing. Police discovered that Dennehy and Stretch had been close to where Lee's body was found. They became suspects in the case. Joanna was described as a woman who loved knives and had been diagnosed with psychopathic, antisocial, and borderline personality disorders. On March 30th, Joanna and Gary Stretch drove to Hereford, where Joanna stabbed 2 men separately and at random. She stole the second man's dog and left the scene. Both men survived more than 20 stabs. One of the men recounted the incident.
I was walking the dog towards a cycle path initially when you get on it, and I suddenly felt what I thought was a really heavy punch in the small of my back.
The police, who had been looking for Joanna and Stretch, soon found them in Hereford. They were both arrested. Another man in the truck was later determined to have been there unwillingly, so he was let go. After Joanna was arrested, the officers asked initial questions to begin her processing. Joanna showed no signs that she had just brutally attacked 2 men, and was even batting her eyes at the officer. She also laughed and made a joke to the officers.
Would you be cheering if you got 32 to murder? No, but I'm just smiling.
On the 3rd of April 2013, after Joanna was arrested, Lucas Slabazewski and John Chapman's bodies were found in another ditch near Thorney. They had been murdered by Joanna on the 29th of March. Joanna was thrilled with the killings, and people who knew her said she liked to be in control. According to her sister, Joanna liked to show the people that she was the boss in every situation. Joanna Deni was charged with 3 counts of murder and 2 counts of attempted murder. In the interrogation room, Deni said nothing to help the investigation.
Did you murder Lukasz Slabazewski?
No.
Did you murder Kevin Lee?
No.
Did you murder John Chapman?
No.
Despite this, Joanna pleaded guilty to all charges. While awaiting trial, a diary that she kept in prison revealed that she was planning to murder a female guard and cut off one of her fingers so she could escape prison. She was placed in solitary confinement and claimed that her human rights had been violated. Her claim was rejected, and in February 2014, Joanna Deni was sentenced to life in prison with the order that she should never be released.
Joanna Deni is today constantly smiling in front of bereaved families at times when she showed nothing but utter disrespect for everything and everybody in that courtroom today.
The people who were present in court said that Joanna was smiling constantly. When she received her sentence, she simply smiled and showed disrespect for the victims' families. She was also reported telling the court, "I'm sorry for the attempted murders, but I'm not sorry for the murders." Where Joanna killed multiple people for the fun of it, the same cannot be said for Anjette Lyle, who murdered her relatives.
Anjette remained cool and unemotional throughout the trial. According to the newspaper account, Mrs. Lyles took the death sentence calmly, her head held high.
Anjette Lyles was a successful restaurant owner in Macon, Georgia in the 1950s. Everyone wanted to have a taste of Lyle's cooking. The restaurant was described as a place of ambience and somewhere people loved to go. Anjette Lyles was born Anjette Donovan on August 23, 1925. In school, she was a poor student, so she soon turned her sights to something she loved doing: cooking. In 1947, she got married to Ben F. Lyles Jr. He owned the Lyle restaurant in Macon with his family. Anjette and Ben soon welcomed their first daughter, Marcia, in 1948. In 1951, they had another daughter named Carla. Anjette started working in the restaurant with her husband and mother-in-law. Anjette was excellent in customer service, and this took the Lyles restaurant to new levels. Things would not remain happy for long. In 1951, Ben developed a throat infection which soon turned into rheumatic fever. He soon stopped working at the restaurant and started drinking and gambling to distract himself from the pain. This landed him in debt, and he tried to sell the restaurant. This made Anjette angry, and this strained their relationship. In December 1951, Ben became sick again, but this time, doctors could not determine the cause. Ben remained in pain till he passed away on January 25, 1952. After her husband died, Anjette and her children moved back to her parents' home. She started working in a diner and saved up her money so she could buy Lyle's restaurant back. In 1955, she did this and hired her mother-in-law to work with her. She also met and married Joe Gabbard. However, this marriage didn't last long, and on December 2, 1955, Gabbard passed away. Anjette refused an autopsy. Anjette was the sole beneficiary of Gabbard's massive insurance policy. She used the money to buy a new car and a home before changing her name back to Lyles. Ben's mother also moved in with Anjette at her request. However, in 1957, she also became sick and had to be hospitalized. Ben's mother died, and a will showed that half of her estate had been left to Anjette and her children. After this, Anjette's behavior began to change towards her first daughter, 9-year-old Marcia. She would insult her and threaten her multiple times. Marcia began coughing up blood in 1958 and was hospitalized. She soon passed away on April 5, 1958. Even though her daughter died, Anjette showed no emotions. After her funeral, the coroner's office received a letter that claimed that Marcia may have been poisoned. Marcia was tested for poison, and when Anjette was informed, she blamed her second daughter, Carla. Police did not buy this, so they started investigating. After they exhumed the bodies of Anjette's late husbands, her mother-in-law, and her daughter, they found traces of arsenic in their bodies. Anjette was arrested, and a search of her house revealed that she had been keeping arsenic inside bottles of ant infestation chemicals.
Anjette was actually tried only for the murder of her 9-year-old daughter, Marcia, but she was also accused of killing 2 husbands and her mother-in-law, Mrs. Julia Lyles, by administering them doses of taro ant poison.
She was charged with the murders of her relatives and found guilty. Anjette's trial lasted a week. She was accused of killing her relatives for financial gain. She was only convicted of the murder of her daughter.
Anjette remained cool and unemotional throughout the trial. According to the newspaper account, Mrs. Lyles took the death sentence calmly, her head held high.
Anjette received the death penalty by electric chair. Even though she became the first woman in Georgia to be sent to death row, Anjette was diagnosed with paranoid schizophrenia and was transferred to the Central State Hospital until she died on December 4, 1977. Anjette Lyles' sinister acts of deception and murder were deeply unsettling. But the next case uncovers a modern tragedy. Janelle Bore, a woman whose actions took a devastating toll, leaving lives forever changed.
My husband and I were in an argument, and he shot me, and then he killed himself.
On February 14, 2017, 43-year-old Janelle Bore called 911 in Michigan because her husband had been shot and killed in their home. When the police officers arrived at the scene, they found out that 35-year-old Gregory Bore was dead from a single gunshot wound to his head in the basement of his home. When they looked around, they found Janelle Bore in the garage with a gunshot wound to the arm. She said she called 911 after she got into a fight with Gregory. Janelle and Gregory were going through a divorce and had been estranged for a while. They shared 2 children, and on the day of the murder, neither were around. After the police assessed the situation, they asked Janelle what had happened. She claimed that she and Gregory had been fighting when he suddenly pulled out his gun and shot her in the arm. She said that he shot himself afterwards, and that was when she called the police. The only issue with her story was the way the crime scene looked and the position in which Gregory had fallen. Immediately, police believed that Janelle was lying and ruled the death a homicide instead of suicide.
Tapped him across the head with my open hand like that. He just went crazy. He grabbed the gun and shot up.
How many times?
I don't know.
When forensic tests were conducted, it was soon revealed that Gregory Bore had not shot himself. In fact, it was Janelle who shot him before firing more rounds into the room. She was also the one who shot herself in the arm because she needed the police to believe the story. Janelle was arrested and charged with open murder and felony firearm charges. Further investigation showed that after Janelle killed Gregory, she rearranged the scene of the murder to make it look like she was telling the truth. Janelle claimed that Gregory was an abusive and violent man, but every other person who knew him said otherwise. As such, after Janelle was charged, she entered a guilty plea for second-degree murder, which inevitably reduced the possibility of her being sentenced to life in prison. In February 2018, Janelle finally stood in court as her former in-laws gave impact statements. Sharon Bore, Gregory's mother, told the court and Janelle that her son didn't have to die. She said, "You had no right to kill my son. He did nothing but believe you, take you in, and love you. I can only hope that where you are going, you get all of the attention you crave and more."
I will never forgive you for what you've done. You've shattered our lives, and most importantly, the lives of Greg's children. I only wish I could trade your worthless, selfish, pathetic life for Greg's.
Gregory's younger brother also gave an impact statement. He addressed Janelle and told her that her actions robbed Gregory of seeing their children grow into their people. He also told her, "I hope you rot." Before Janelle was sentenced, she simply turned and apologized to the judge for taking Gregory's life. She was sentenced to 17 to 19 years in prison. Janelle Bore killed her husband for reasons that turned out to be lies. How does it compare to a woman who killed her husband to hide the lies she was telling him?
She was convicted and sentenced to life without parole.
From a young age, Kristen Rossom developed an interest in smoking cigarettes and drinking beer. She was in high school when she started this habit. It was not sure what she needed them for, but she soon gravitated towards marijuana. However, she said it had a little effect, so in 1992, Rossom started using meth. In 1994, she suffered a relapse and had to leave university. Eventually, she soon conquered her addiction and enrolled at San Diego University. There, she met Greg DeVillers, and they started dating. Rossom graduated with honors in 1998 and started working as a toxicologist. She got married to DeVillers in 1999. This happy life didn't last long because Rossom started an affair with her boss, Dr. Michael Robertson, in 2000. Later that year, DeVillers was horrified to learn that not only had she been cheating on him, she had also continued using meth. She got access to the drug with help of her lover, who was also her enabler. DeVillers threatened to expose both of them to the medical examiner if she did not quit her job and leave Robertson. On November 6, 2000, Rossom called 911 at night and said that DeVillers had committed suicide. When paramedics arrived, they were met with a strange sight. DeVillers was unresponsive in their bed, and there were rose petals sprinkled around him. He was pronounced dead, and Rossom told the police he had committed suicide. Despite this, DeVillers' family said this wasn't true and that he was not suicidal. Reluctantly, the police opened a homicide investigation. Because Rossom worked as a toxicologist at the medical center in San Diego, DeVillers' autopsy was outsourced to an outside lab to avoid conflict of interest. 1 month after DeVillers died, Rossom and Robertson were fired because of Rossom's meth habit and Robertson enabling her. Soon enough, the test results came back and they showed that he had 7 times the lethal dose of fentanyl in his system. Something was off and the police began to take the case seriously. 7 months after DeVillers' murder, Rossom was arrested and charged with murder. During interrogation, she claimed that she had gone to work in the morning and returned home in the afternoon to give her sick husband a bowl of soup. She went back to work before she returned home around 7 p.m. She said it was after she showered and entered the bedroom that she discovered DeVillers lying motionless on the bed.
2 more breaths. Count this chest 15 more times. Take 2 more breaths. You're doing fine.
The 911 call sounded like Rossom had been administering CPR, but this didn't clear her of guilt. She was charged to court where a receipt for a single red rose that Rossom bought was presented. The defense claimed that de Villers had crumpled the rose around himself after using fentanyl. However, the amount of fentanyl in his system showed that this wasn't possible. Tests also revealed that the dose of fentanyl had been administered around the time that Rossom went home and gave her husband soup. Prosecutors claim that Rossom had killed her husband to hide her affair and her meth addiction. So, on November 12, 2002, Rossom was found guilty of first-degree murder. She was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole and a $10,000 fine. In a very short clip, she could be seen crying. Kristen Rossom killed her husband to hide her addiction and affair. Michelle Despain killed hers so she could be with another person and cash in on her husband's death.
Preston, your father.
My father?
Yes, ma'am. Your father will be arrested for murder. I have all the information, all the evidence I need.
Not Mark's father.
No, ma'am. Your father.
Mark Despain was a successful property investor and real estate appraiser in Jonesboro. He lived a fairly successful life with his wife Michelle and his stepdaughter, Michelle's daughter from a previous relationship. Mark Despain had been in a family business with his parents before Michelle came along. Because of the constant arguments based on lies that Michelle had been feeding her husband about his parents, Mark and his parents soon fell out, and he started his business with Michelle managing their money. Michelle intended to isolate Mark from his family so she could do as she liked with his finances. So, in another desperate attempt to do so, she had her daughter take intimate photos of herself and had them sent to Jack's phone. She claimed that Jack Despain, Mark's father, had forced her daughter to take those pictures. Soon, Jack was arrested and his wife, Tana Despain, left him. After a couple of years, Michelle's daughter started to cave and kept on mixing details about the alleged incident. Because of this, Jack was released and his wife came back to him, realizing he wasn't an evil person. This already damaged their relationship, and Michelle Despain succeeded in isolating her husband from his family. This gave her the chance to spend Mark's money on her lover, a much younger banker where she worked. Soon, Mark started failing and somehow ended up in debt of over $1 million. After Michelle learned that Mark had bought a life insurance policy, she began to plan something deadly.
What happened to your husband, ma'am? He's dead. Ma'am, I need you to take a deep breath, okay, and tell me what's going on.
In August 2011, Michelle came back from work and found Despain dead in their home. He had been shot in the head and the chest. Michelle called 911 and the police first thought that this was just a burglary gone wrong. However, when they realized that things robbers would take were in place, they got suspicious. It also didn't help that Michelle and her father, Carl Kelly, kept pointing and accusing Jack Despain of killing his son.
I mean, I hate to think that his dad would do anything like that because it is his son, but he's just very...
With the conflicting stories and the fact that the case didn't have much evidence to go on, Mark's body was released to Michelle and he was buried. Even in death, Michelle isolated Mark from his family, and they were only allowed to see Mark right before he was buried. The case was stumped until the police received a tip from an anonymous person. They were told that a man named Terrence Barker was bragging that he had killed Mark. They were also informed that on the day of the murder, an old blue Mercedes was circling the area of Mark's home. Barker was arrested and he quickly admitted that he had killed Mark. However, he didn't know him, and he was just offered thousands of dollars to carry out the hit. He said that the person that approached him was Johnny Hubbard, one of Mark's tenants in the buildings he owned. Michelle's father was a rent collector in the building where Johnny was living. Coincidentally, Johnny owned the Mercedes that the police learned about. After Johnny was arrested, he quickly implicated Carl Kelly, saying that he had given him access to Mark's house.
If you don't do what he tells you to do, you get on the street.
Kelly was arrested, and when Michelle learned about it, she turned on him, saying that he probably killed her husband so he could have a share in Mark's massive life insurance policy. However, when detectives got access to the phones of Kelly, Barker, Johnny, and Michelle, they found out that there was more to the story. On the day of the murder, Michelle had texted her father, "It has to be today." She then tricked Mark to get out of the house while Kelly gave Barker access to the house. Michelle was arrested and charged with the murder of her husband.
My father?
Yes, ma'am. Your father will be arrested for murder. I have all the information, all the evidence I need.
Not Mark's father.
No, ma'am. Your father.
Carl Kelly and Terrence Barker were sentenced to 35 years in prison for first-degree murder. Johnny Hubbard got 18 years for hindering apprehension and violation of a previous probation he was on. Carl Kelly died of congestive heart failure soon after. In 2014, Michelle bargained for a plea deal by pleading guilty to 3 counts of hindering apprehension. She avoided a capital murder charge and she was sentenced to 30 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 5 years. Like Michelle Despain, Denise Williams had her husband murdered so she could cash in on his insurance fund.
Do adjudicate you guilty of counts 1 and 2. On count 1, I sentence you to 30 years, Department of Corrections. On count 2, I sentence you to life in prison.
On December 16, 2000, Mike Williams disappeared after he went duck hunting in Lake Seminole, Florida. Justice will not be served until 17 years later, and the person behind the whole tragedy was his wife, Denise Williams. Mike and Denise got married in 1994 and had 1 daughter. Their life was happy and simple. As a hobby, Mike enjoyed duck hunting and would often go every morning. In 1999, Mike bought a $1 million life insurance policy from a man named Brian Winchester. Winchester was a childhood friend of Denise and soon became best friends with Brian as well. In the afternoon of December 16, 2000, Denise called her father to tell him that Mike had not come back from his hunting trip. Denise's father and Winchester drove around the areas where they knew Mike went frequently. Near a boat launch, they found his car and called the Conservation Commission. A search team was organized, but they had to stop after a storm blew in. Mike was believed to have drowned because his boat was found with a shotgun in the boat. Because of the way the lake was, he might have been trapped under the stumps and hydrilla in the deep waters. Mike's body wasn't found, and the speculation was that his body had been found by alligators who had dragged his body away. The night after the search ended and Mike was declared legally dead, Denise held a memorial for her husband. While Denise accepted that her husband was gone, his mother, Cheryl Williams, refused to accept this. So she took out ads in the paper, wrote to police officers, and soon started writing a letter a day to the governor of Florida. In the meantime, Denise had cashed in on Mike's insurance policy and received $1.5 million. 5 years later, she married Winchester and they continued to live in the house that Denise and Mike had lived in together. Cheryl Williams didn't give up looking for her son because she believed that he could not have drowned in the lake. Even though the case was closed twice, she remained persistent until things began to change again. When detectives looked closer, they discovered that it was not possible for alligators to have been looking for food at the time Mike went missing. They realized that nothing could have caused Mike's body to disappear from the lake like that. Soon enough, they started considering the option of whether the lake wasn't even where he went missing. A huge break came in the case almost 16 years later. Winchester and Denise had gotten a divorce on account of Winchester's sex addiction. On August 5, 2016, Denise saw someone climb into the back seat of her car, and it turned out to be Winchester. He pointed a gun at her and told her the reason he was doing this was because she was blocking his calls and text messages. Denise was able to convince him not to do anything rash. She also promised that she wouldn't go to the police, so he let her go. Denise went straight to the police and told them that Winchester had kidnapped her. He was sentenced to 20 years in prison for that crime. In 2017, it suddenly came out that Mike's remains had been found. Mike's remains were found 5 miles from where he grew up, and the DNA they could extract from his remains matched his mother's own. Denise was arrested and charged with first-degree murder, conspiracy to commit first-degree murder, and accessory after the fact. Winchester soon confessed that he and Denise had planned Mike's murder so they could be together and get his insurance money. Winchester admitted to shooting Mike in the face after he tried to drown him but failed. He said that since he could not get Mike to drown, he killed him and buried him where his remains were later found. Denise was found guilty of all charges and sentenced to life in prison. She did not say anything in court and remained mute for most of the sessions. Mike's mother talked in court, however.
I wrote 2,600 letters to the governor of Florida asking for help in finding my son.
After her sentencing, all of Mike's assets were given to his daughter, who is now 20 years old. As part of the deal that Denise took, her daughter was not allowed to pay for any of her mother's legal fees. Denise is serving her sentence at the Florida Women's Reception Center. Denise didn't pay for her crimes for a long time. The same cannot be said about our next case.
Cousin's house. Somebody has shot him or something's happened. He's passed away.
Okay, what's his address? Okay, how old is he?
69.
Are we certain he's gone?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Judith Nicks and her husband had been divorced since 2011, but they kept in touch and lived together for most of the time. They had been married for 25 years before this, and they both had children from previous relationships. On March 21, 2016, Judith called 911 saying that she found Keith Nicks dead from a gunshot wound. She was dropping dinner off for him when she discovered this. When the dispatcher asked if Keith was suicidal, she said he was. Judith told the police officers that she called Keith earlier, but he didn't answer the phone. She said he must have committed suicide. However, when investigators started looking, they discovered that Keith had been shot twice. To them, it made no sense that a person who committed suicide could shoot themselves twice in the head. The autopsy also revealed that he was dead 14 hours before Judith called 911. The investigation started, and Michelle, Judith's first daughter, was part of the people first questioned. Michelle claimed that Keith was abusive and that she and her sister, Angela, didn't get along with him. She also contradicted the story her mother had told the police. She was soon arrested and charged with suspicion of being an accessory to murder after the fact. When Judith heard this, she came in and confessed. She said that on the morning of the murder, Keith had threatened her because she owed him $21,000 for spending heavily on her daughters. She claimed that he had threatened to shoot her, and they struggled for the gun. She took possession, and the gun went off twice and killed Keith. However, holes were in this story because Keith's bedroom showed no signs of struggle. Because of this, she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. Her daughters were not innocent either because they had helped her clean the scene of the crime. Investigation showed that Judith would get the house if Keith died before her. She could then sell the house and use it to pay other debts. She was charged to court, and in exchange for dropping all charges, Judith's daughters agreed to testify against their mother. A year after Keith was murdered, Judith was found guilty of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 45 years. Next, we unravel the chilling case of Sakina Muhammad, a story of deception, betrayal, and an unexpected turn of events that will keep you on the edge of your seat.
Ms. Muhammad, is there anything you would like to say?
I just want to say sorry to my daughter. That's it.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
On March 13, 2022, Wyoming police responded to an apartment after a woman said she heard her daughter and her boyfriend arguing on the phone when she called. Her daughter was 21-year-old Sakina Muhammad, and her boyfriend was 27-year-old Quan Andre Winston Jr. When police got to the home, Winston was found dead and shot in the head. His body was at the bottom of the stairwell, and there was no one else in the house. Sakina Muhammad and her 11-month-old daughter that she shared with Winston were missing. The next day, Sakina turned herself in and told the police that she had killed Winston in self-defense. She told the police that Winston was choking her and that she decided she already had enough and shot him. Winston and Sakina had a violent relationship, and Winston had been arrested for assault and domestic violence twice before. He had a lengthy history of violence, and at the time, things were very tense between the two. He had just pleaded no contest to aggravated assault and domestic violence when he went to the house he shared with Sakina and their daughter. Even though there was a court order that protected Sakina from him, Winston ignored the order and went there regardless. It is not sure what they were arguing about, but when things got too heated, Sakina claimed that Winston started strangling her, and in self-defense, she pointed the gun at him. According to witnesses, Winston was begging for his life after Sakina pointed the gun at him. Allegedly, when Winston begged Sakina not to kill him, she responded and told him, "No bro, you're dead," before shooting him. 30 minutes before she murdered Winston, Sakina posted on social media that she was single as a MF. Sakina was charged with first-degree murder, homicide open murder, and felony firearms. Even though she claimed that she had shot him in self-defense, the jury rejected her claims based on evidence. It was revealed that Sakina was standing too far away from Winston to have shot him in self-defense. The jury found Sakina guilty of all charges, and it was time to deliver the verdict. Sakina showed no form of remorse for what she did, and said only one sentence in court.
Ms. Muhammad, is there anything you would like to say?
I just want to say sorry to my daughter. That's it.
All right, fair enough. Thank you.
Ultimately, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. The shocking reactions of these killers have shown just how twisted human nature can be. But the story doesn't end here. There are even more jaw-dropping cases waiting for you. The next video on screen dives deeper into the wildest courtroom moments and the most chilling crimes you will ever hear about. Watch now. You won't want to miss it.